So, John Beltman, Wood Week 2026 featured speaker, one of North House's founding instructors. He's been with us for a long time. Certainly I've relished moments with him anywhere from, in the wood shop to watching him arriving, setting up his tent for winners gathering outside, and not that long ago, traveling to Jokkmokk, Sweden above the Arctic Circle with him as part of one of our trips, North House's engagements connecting to the world of craft. So I'm honored and excited to introduce John Beltman. Mr. Beltman, please take it away.
Thank you, Greg, and thank you all for being here. I'm honored to have been asked to speak tonight. Greg mentioned I've been here for a long time. I've taught a lot of different classes, and evidence of those classes can be seen around the room. I've taught workbench classes. I've taught Windsor stool classes. I've taught snowshoe classes. I've taught various boat building classes, and I'm also happy to say that I've taught exactly one gluten-free baking class. And it was a sellout. It was quite successful, and it was fun. I was also one of the lead instructors for a while, back when that was a new idea, and we were tasked with making North House a better place, and those duties have been passed on to other people at this point. I want to talk tonight about my life, the things I've done, reflections, and I hope that this inspires questions and maybe inspires more questions and answers and some discussion. I have been very fortunate to have had a lot of different experiences and worked with a lot of different significant mentors and friends and students, and oftentimes the line is blurred between the mentors and the friends and who exactly is the student and who's learning. And I'm also very pleased when I meet students who I've had an effect on, as I just did tonight. So a bit about my background. I went to school in Anoka, at Anoka High School. And at the time it was the biggest high school in the state. And I was not a particularly academic student or engaged in the process, but my life was changed dramatically by two significant posters that I saw in my high school. And the first of those was a poster. Back in the day, you didn't use your cell phone to get all the information, and nobody had a cell phone, and you didn't, apply for a job on the phone, and you didn't get the news, and you didn't check Facebook, but it was posters, and I'm happy to say that posters are still part of our life. And this particular poster was for a job working in the woods at a YCC camp in Isabella. And this was a residential program created by the Forest Service. And it was partly to give young people work, but it was also partly to help out the Forest Service with some labor. I don't know, which was more beneficial. And I met a number of people that I still know to this day, and this is very influential to me. The program was at the Isabella ELC. I don't know if anybody remembers that, but it was originally a CCC camp. And the Isabella CCC camp was the first CCC camp in Minnesota. And then it was taken over by the Forest Service, became an environmental learning center, and in the summertime it was this residential youth conservation corps. And that's where I met, first of all, you recognize this one, Bob Hunger. And Bob ran the program. Bob was a Forest Service employee. He was a former school math teacher, I believe, from Chicago, and then he worked for the Forest Service. He ran the National Forest Lodge, which is on the shores of Lake Jagoka, which you may, I don't even know if it's there, but you might know some of the finest ski trails in the state are on the Isabella and Lake Jagoka there. I also met Cheryl Larson, who was a crew leader, and now she's an instructor at North House. I met Jim Gallagher. I don't know if any of you have met him, but he has been a student. He's an accomplished woodworker, and he had a career in the field of natural resources. I met Bob Fox, who I then later ended up building log houses with. Lori Brown, who became a lifelong friend. And I met this guy here, George Rule. And this is significant because I was a high school kid from Anoka, and this guy had a sawmill in the woods. And not only that, but this sawmill was something that he'd found abandoned in the woods. It was an old sawmill. And he asked the landowner, and he drug it home, and he looked it up, and he wrote to the company. That's what you did then. And this was sold as a portable sawmill. And the portable sawmill meant that it was skidded by horses from one location to the next. Well, he rebuilt it, and he sawed lumber, and I used to buy cedar from him to make canoe paddles from. But it was the first time I'd ever seen a sawmill. And he, unfortunately, shortly after that, had a little feud with the neighbors, and he wasn't available for sawing after that. But that's another tangent. Oh, wait a minute. Here, I'm getting ahead of myself. So I discovered in Isabella, I discovered a world of trees and forestry and forest management and trail work and remote camping and hard work. And the second significant poster I saw hanging on the wall at my high school, among all of the posters advertising colleges, and there are many, advertising wonderful educational experiences, was a poster for a college, and on the poster were draft horses. I thought, that's what I want to do there. And so I in fact did in the winter of 1979, 1980, I went to Craftsbury Common. This is the post office, or as it was often referred to, the Federal Building. And this sort of gives you an idea of the scope of that town and perhaps the size of the college. This was a college that was teaching rural resource management, forestry, agriculture, and very hands-on things. It was a one-year program when I went there. It later became a four-year program. And I did, in fact, when I was there, learn to drive draft horses and to harness them. And this is in 1980 or 81. It must have been 80. And the school had two horses, Bonnie and Red. We drove them singly, always. We skidded logs with them. And that was a memorable experience to me. Well, we'll talk more about horses here shortly. I also met this guy, Horace Straub, a canoe builder. And this is the guy who I ultimately learned to build canoes from. And he was there in Vermont. He was a school teacher. He'd been a public school teacher. He was now teaching wood shop at Sterling. He was a canoeer. He was an avid snowshoer. He was a dairy farmer. His brother lived next door on the family farm, and then he had this other smaller operation. He had a shop that he'd skidded over from the church on the common when they no longer needed a carriage house, and he brought this building over and made a shop out of it, and he built canoes there. Let's see, what else here? So after this year, my brief stint at college, I returned to Minnesota, to the Tofte Ranger Station, where I got a job with the Forest Service. And that was at a time when this building was a Forest Service garage. Some of you remember that. Trucks were parked in here. The building across the street was the main office for the Grand Marais District. And so I was working out of the Tofte District. I didn't do a lot here, but I do remember being here in these buildings back when they were Forest Service. I lived up at Brule Lake, and in a cabin. I don't know if that one, if there's any Forest Service people here, I wonder what became of the cabin at Brule Lake. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. I met, once again, some really interesting and influential people at the Forest Service. I had the great pleasure of working for 2 summers with Kjell Anderson. And you can just imagine what a great deal of fun and what an eye-opening and educational experience that would be to paddle a canoe with Kjell Anderson for 2 summers. And I learned a lot. I was inspired toward an interest in the natural world and an interest in simple living. And so that was kind of the start of some of those. I also met, at that time, this guy, Bill Hafman. He's a canoe builder, of course, yet another canoe builder. I made a pilgrimage over to his shop on the Big Fork River, and I went up and I knocked on his door, and I said I was interested in, I'd heard he made cedar canoe paddles. I'd never seen one, and I was interested in a canoe paddle. He says, well, I don't have any, but if you're going to be around, we could make some. And so on that, Bill Hafman said, he and I sat in his shop, and I made this canoe paddle, which is made out of cedar. It's really lightweight. It's different than any paddle I'd ever used before. It's not the best paddle I've ever made, but it was. I learned a lot from him, and I learned about making tools, about different kinds of tools, and about making tools and tools for convex shapes and concave shapes. Okay. And let's see here. And I also met a young, energetic, creative guy that was living up the shore in Chicago Bay. And I heard he was building birch bark canoes. And I went up and knocked on his door, and that was Mark Hansen. And I hit it off with him right away and had a lot to say, Mark and I did. And I also, the first time I met Cindy Lou and Bill Hansen, I don't know, is Cindy Lou here? Can she corroborate this story? No, well, anyway, she claims that the first time she ever saw me, I was paddling into the landing at Sawbill, and I'd been out in the woods, and I had big buckets of Juneberries in the canoe. And they were at the end of the Sawbill Trail, and I was over at Brill Lake, yeah. So I was inspired by a lot of these people, and perhaps not really in this process a conscious decision toward living simply, but maybe just more of a subconscious decision, a decision nonetheless. I also at this time was observing my colleagues at the Forest Service, and what I observed was that many of these people would work in the summers on the trail, in canoes, cruising timber, out in the woods, and then in the winters they'd go back to college, of course, study forestry, study natural resources. And then they'd come back the next summer, they'd have a little higher GS rating, and then back to college, and then back, and then back. And when they got really good and graduated from college, then they were given a desk job. And I thought, oh geez, a desk job for the federal government? No, I'm not gonna do that, I'm not gonna do that. So, I packed up my 1949 Ford truck, and I drove back to Vermont. And I don't know if there's anybody in the room that can confirm this story here, but Mike Shumesky, do you remember this truck?
Oh. I think I've probably seen that one. I used to have a 46.
Yeah. And so I really did drive this out to Vermont. And I worked first, once again, with Horace Strong, who I'd met in earlier times, and I was apprentice at his canoe shop there, and I was there for one winter, and also at that same time was Maureen Hayes, which I don't know if Maureen still lives in Grand Marais or not, but she was a surveyor here, and she was out there learning to build canoes. She went back to New York and built canoes in her hometown, and then one day I'm in Grand Marais, and here's Maureen 20 years later in Grand Marais. And we built about 6 canoes that winter, and this canoe that you see that Horace is standing by here, and that's his design, the Osmer Queen, and we did a lot of repair work. Now, I became, well, wait a minute, I'm getting ahead of myself here. I then went from Horace's shop then to a place called the Apprentice Shop in Bath, Maine, and I learned to build lapstrake boats there. And I met some significant people there. Lance Lee, who is the director and the founder of the Apprentice Shop, and is just a driven man, and still is, as far as I know. He's a very old man now, and I see online he's still speaking about boats and his passion for boats. And he started the Apprentice Shop, he started the Restoration Shop, he had a falling out with the Bath Maritime Museum, he started a new apprentice shop, then he started the Atlantic Challenge and brought boats over from France and all kinds of things. He was an inspiration to me. I met Gregory Moore, who was a fellow apprentice who I went on to build some boats with, and another guy who will come up later in the story, John Eastman, who built Sharpies. Sharpies are very flat boats. I didn't understand at all at the time because I was building these lightweight, very sleek canoes, and he was building things that looked like toolboxes. But Sharpies, well, you could talk a great deal about design of wooden boats, but they're a whole different thing. So I became immersed in the concept of wooden boats and watertight joinery, and the concept of building things that are not flat and square. And now, oh, geez, I did it again. Okay, a few thoughts about hand tools before we go on. So I believe that we're attracted to hand tools for their simplicity and their efficiency and their freedom, freeing us from any constraints of having to be in the shop. You can use hand tools anywhere in the woods. You can do a lot of things, but there's also a certain amount of connections to some ideals and values from the past, and maybe a certain amount of magic. And you also can't ignore the fact that they are a great deal of fun. Now, I've developed a passion for building things that are not flat and square. I've built boats, I've built snowshoes, I've built chairs, I've built various things like that. And machines are very good at flat and square. And I'm not here to bash machines. Machines are very useful. I think Lauren's in the crowd. She can vouch for the fact that I do use machines. But generally speaking, you know, we all learn in high school shop class, or at least back in the day, I don't know what they teach now, that you know, you got to have a table saw, and you got to have a chop saw, and maybe a belt sander. And then you go to Home Depot, and they confirm all this. Yeah, that's what you got to have. But then, you know, how do you carve a spoon if all you have is these you know, machines that are good at flat and square? The hand tools give you the freedom to do things. And I see people that are limited by their tools, and this is something in my classes I try to break that habit. You know, as you become proficient, and there's a learning curve here, but as you become proficient with sharp hand tools, the versatility is huge. And so the concept of building things not flat and square is something that I have had a passion for, and many of my classes also. I worked at the apprentice shop. I built a flat bottom skiff. I built a couple of pea pods. I apparently didn't take pictures of them. And then I started a business partnership with Gregory Moore, the Beltman and Moore Canoe Works. And we were primarily restoring canoes. And in 1980, there was a lot of canoes to restore, a huge demand for it. The Grumman airplane factory started stamping out aluminum canoes in about, I don't know, 1950 or 60. And that's when all the canoes in Maine got tucked up in the garage. And there was thousands of them, because the Old Town Maine was the center of wooden canoe building, but there was hundreds of little shops around there. Thousands of canoes stuck in people's garage. So 1980, these two guys are fixing canoes. And we were in a very visual spot on the side of the road. Every day people would come by. Oh my God, I got one of those in the garage. It was my grandpa's. We haven't used it, and you can fix it. So we did a lot of that. And this is a typical canoe that would come into our shop, been set upside down on the ground. This is of course the bow right up there. It's all rotten, typical. The canvas has gone off of it. These are, for those of you that don't know about this construction, these are cedar ribs, cedar planks, and then covered in canvas. The canvas is not adhered or glued to the hull, but rather stretched on in an envelope so that the wood can shrink and swell. And we would then replace planks, replace ribs, stretch on new canvas. As you see here, it's way more complicated than those pictures show, but that's the idea. And this one, this white one on the left, is the same canoe that you saw earlier. Yeah. The new canvas is just transformed. I mean, the method of building them, they're made to repair. You put new canvas on, you got a new boat. The oldest one we did had canvas. We say that the canvas lasts for 25 years and then you replace it. The oldest one we ever did was 75-year-old canvas, and he was still paddling it, although it leaked. Yeah. Let's see. What else we got here? So during my time in Maine there, I also built a lap straight canoe. And this is what when I started at the apprenticeship, this is what I really wanted to do. I wanted to learn lap straight boat building, and I wanted to build small, dainty boats. I didn't want to build big, heavy sailing boats. This is a lap straight sailing canoe. It's 14 feet long. And it is based on a design by Bob Baker, who designed a lot of different boats. And he designed a boat called the Piccolo, and it was 12 feet long. And so I called up Bob Baker, and I said, 12 feet long? I'm challenging the master on his design. And canoes, to me, are narrow, low volume vessels, and this is compensated for by the length, and you get buoyancy and things by the length, and also they track better when they're longer. So a little short, fat. So I said, can I change your design? And he said yes, but then it's not my design, and whatever you do, it's not my fault. But go ahead. Okay. So we called this one the oboe. It's a woodwind. And it's 14 feet long, and it has seats in it. His did not. His was in the style of old English canoes, where you would sit on the bottom here with a double paddle. This one's got mast in it for a catch rig. It's got the rudder. It has foot pedals that operate the rudder. We did the casting. Well, I didn't cast it, but I made those patterns for the gudgeons and pintles and had the bronze castings done. And this was all sort of made possible because I found someone who would buy this canoe. And here's the canoe on launching day to the right. We didn't have the sails done, but this is the proper sails on the left with the owner and his father, and a catch rig with a sliding gunter rig, I believe it's called, or sliding lug rig, standing lug rig. Yeah? Standing lug, okay. So I built that boat. I haven't talked to, Tom Snowman is the owner. I haven't talked to him in years, so I presume it's doing just fine. Also at my time in Maine, I was living no surprise, in a shack at the end of a dirt road in Lincolnville, and Lincolnville Beach, I believe, was the town I was in. And Lincolnville Beach had the distinction, I remember this, is that right on the shore of the Atlantic Ocean was a bank of payphones across the street from the post office. And you could go down there in the evening and have a seat on the bench and make all your calls. And then I'd go back to the shack in the woods on the Duck Trap River. And so one night, so there's no cell phones, and there was no phone in this place. So no one, and there was hardly any traffic. You know, you never saw cars pull up. Car pulls up. Oh my God. And I get a knock on the door, and it's John Eastman, the Sharpie builder. And he says, I got somebody you got to meet, and it can't wait till tomorrow because he's leaving town, and I think you should meet this guy. And so I lit the candles and lit the gas lamps, and they come, and 11 o'clock at night. And this was the first time I ever met Jim Brandenburg, the photographer for National Geographic. And he did classes, photography classes on the East Coast, and he had been looking for someone to work on his buildings up in Ely. And he had a log building that was unfinished, and he had this big bog, a lady slipper bog, and then 100 stairs up on the edge of the cliff was another cabin that he said, could be a caretaker's cabin up there. And then I could, work. He'd, of course, pay me to work on his cabin. So it happened, and so I ended up heading back to Ely. I was caretaking, I was doing restoration, I was doing a creative log. There was a number of log builders there that I learned from at the time in Ely. Barry Bissonnet was building log buildings, and I did some repair work for him. And as part of this whole arrangement with Jim Brandenburg, he was at the time documenting wolves, and he was going up to Ellesmere Island and taking pictures. He did a book on the wolves of Ellesmere Island, and he was taking pictures and radio tracking wolves. And then he got the opportunity to keep captive wolves at his place, except he didn't exactly live there all the time. And so I became the caretaker then for these 4 wolves for a time. This is the house I lived in, and this was not the house proper. This was sort of a closed-in porch kind of a thing. And these 4 little wolves were there. And the idea is that they would bond to the people so that he could take pictures of them. And wolves do bond to people and to other dogs, and if they're raised from young wolves. This is where I first met Marco when I lived in Ely, and I met Lori Schmidt, who later became the director of the Wolf Center up there. She was involved with these wolves as well, and she is now just retired from wolf work. And so as they got bigger, of course, they can't live in the house, and so we built a fence for them. I'm instructed to build a fence down below at Jim's place, and we're going to string 2x4s between the trees and nail them up there, and then we're going to put chain link fence up. And up there in Ely, it's all in bedrock. We're not going to put posts in the ground. So I'm up on a ladder pruning trees 8 feet up with the chainsaw, and this is when I cut myself in the forehead with the chainsaw, which was really bloody, but if you're going to cut yourself in the face, the forehead is the place to do it. I got rushed into town, I got sewn up. And this was taken just shortly after I got back from the hospital with the stitches in my head. And no surprise, there is a wooden canoe in the background of that picture. I also, in Ely, I made a whole lot of canoe paddles. And it was a good market to sell them. I'd kind of refined what I'd first made with Bill Hafman and made these beaver tail paddles, and I'd refined the grip so you could get your fingers around them. I don't have a good example of one with me because most of these got sold. And then I made some more elaborate canoe paddles for 26-foot fur trade North canoes. And these are inspired, these aren't, exact copies of anything, but they're inspired by paddles that were used back then. And I made a set, this one in the middle, I made a set, I think this is the set I made for the Milwaukee Museum. And they had bought a North canoe from Ray Bozell, the heir to the Hafman Boat Shop. And then he subcontracted the paddles to me, and they're still there as far as I know. I did a Google search, and you can do the little virtual tour, and oh, there they are. So, yeah. So if you're in Milwaukee, let's see, canoe paddle. Oh, and then I ended up in Longville. So I also met Danny Yoakum and Jeff Jepson. Jeff Jepson's been a student here. He's a tree climber. He's an arborist. He's a woodworker. And I met a guy named Coot, and we all built log cabins together for a couple of winters. I ended up in Longville, and Bob Fox was on the crew for a while as well. And it was in Longville that I built a mold for a wood canvas canoe. Finally got around to doing that. So this was a canoe of my own design. So the process of designing the canoe involved lofting here, which is a full-size drawing in 3 dimensions of the canoe. Now, I'm not working from plans. I'm working from lines that I've measured off of various other boats. I measured a Saliga canoe, I measured a Chestnut Prospector, I measured another old town that I liked, and I measured this little skinny Winona Sola canoe that I really liked, although the shear was ugly and flat. But I imagined, boy, if you put a nice, boy, that'd be, yeah. And it had really straight lines, and it was really fast. So I took all of these lines and I put them together on this lofting board, and I designed a canoe that I thought was going to work, and in fact it did. And then up here is the plywood molds based on these drawings, and you use cabinet grade plywood because they must be flat. You can't have any potato chip looking plywood from the lumberyard for this process. And then the molds get pine rib ends lengthwise on them, and then they get steel put on. So you're making a big, heavy backing iron. I think there's still one over in the red building, and we've used those here at North House a bit. And so then when building the canoe, over in this next picture, you bend the ribs, this is the ribs and a bit of the stem, bend the ribs over the steel, and then when the planking goes on, the little brass tacks go through the planking, through the ribs, and then they clench over on the steel. And this is a method that was invented out, as I said, in Old Town, Maine, near Old Town, the vicinity. They get all the credit, but there was a lot of different builders there. And it was a production method. It was a method where early 20th century white guys looked at birch bark canoes and said, geez, those are kind of nice, but couldn't we build those with machines? And they did. And so these are pretty machine intensive. You make all the planking, you make all the ribs, you plane all the planking, you plane all the ribs, you taper everything. And then they go on the mold, and then they pop off the mold. So they really are made to be a production item. And now they're a traditional craft, but originally that was not the intent. And they're relatively quick to build. They don't leak because they got canvas on them, and they're easy to restore. So I built 3 canoes off this mold. I ended up moving to the Iron Range. I took the mold with me. I built canoes there. And then ultimately, when I wasn't building canoes anymore, it became apparent that this big, heavy thing wasn't useful. I sold the mold to a guy named Dick Butler. And Dick Butler is a really interesting guy. And he then built a couple of canoes, and he brought one to a wooden boat show at North House. And I would happen to be the tour guide on that. So Dick and I got to tour around and show off the boat that I designed that he built and talk about the whole process. And then Dick, you know, you sell this guy, you know, I never met the guy before. I sell this to him. And then for years afterwards, he would come over and visit and you know, ask my advice and bring projects to work on. And we'd go out in the shop and we'd have lunch. And you know, I got to know him pretty well. And then he just kind of fell off the radar. And now I've heard that he has died. And I don't know where that canoe mold is. No. And this is canoes off of the mold. This one's done in cherry with cane seats. And this picture was taken in Longville. And then I built some with ash and some with cherry. Yeah. And then it was becoming abundantly clear that I could not and should not compete with production work. Now, there's a number of ways to go about this traditional woodworking, and one of them, of course, as you all know, is to build as many things as you can, as fast as you can, and then sell them cheap. And this was not what I wanted to spend my time doing. And if you're selling them at too cheap, it does not become a sustainable model. But you know, but how to build a life around traditional craft? Because you have to get your money somewhere, or at least I haven't figured out how not to. In 1989, I moved to the Iron Range. I kept building canoes. And then I got the opportunity to build a bateau. And this was my first interaction with the Minnesota Historical Society and the Forest History Center. And so this is a display that they built in 1989. The building behind is a floating wanigan, and this was used in log drives. So on the log drive, about 30 men would be employed pushing and pulling and prodding, keeping logs moving. They would spend months on the river in the spring, and they had to eat. So the wanigan would follow the drive and feed them. The bateau is for moving men. I met some interesting people on this project. I didn't actually have the contract. A guy named Tim Ewert had the contract. He was a lot more savvy than I in these sorts of things, and he'd done work for the Historical Society before. But he asked me if I wanted to subcontract the work. The advantage to me is that he bought all the materials and put all the money up front that was necessary, and I built the boat. This is a picture on the day we launched it. I sort of think one of those guys is you, Marco, but I don't remember which one.
I don't recognize myself.
You don't, okay. And then of course on the far right there is John Finkel. Yeah. And there's another shot of John Finkel there, the old river rat himself. Yeah. So the bateau is made with tamarack knees. These were dug out of a swamp north of Bemidji in June when there was still a little frost down there. And the advantage of this is these knees, the grain follows around the knee. So it makes a very strong corner there. And this is how I got the contract, is because I said I was going to do it, the way it was done. And so this boat is not built with molds. You do the lofting, which I did. Once again, we had this whole process of designing the boat. We looked at old boats. We looked at pictures. We looked at some designs. We went to Superior, Wisconsin, where there was an old bateau that we measured. And I worked with Skip Drake on this project. He was the first site manager at the Forest History Center, and he was really a good guy to work with. He was the guy who put out, the call for bids and that. So then, after it's designed, lofted, ribs are made, or frames, not molds, because these are part of the boat. And then the planking is put on there. And this is white pine. It's a 32-foot long boat. There is a splice in every plank. And this white pine was sourced from Gerke's Mill in Cass Lake. And the Gerke family is pretty impressive. They know how to, wherever you need, they can help you out. They move buildings. They saw white pine. They process wild rice. And they're still at it. I don't think it's the same generation, but yeah, pretty interesting. And then, so that was the bateau. And then in 1992, as you can see up there, I built a bread oven. And this was a project for the White Oak Society in Deer River that was recreating a fur post to commemorate, to recognize the presence of the Northwest Company that had been on White Oak Point. So I got the job of building the bread oven. I didn't know a lot about that then, but they have done it up at Grand Portage. So I talked to them. The frame is built out of sticks like this. Now you could build the frame out of any kind of wood. Once you put a fire in it, the frame burns up. It's built out of clay. And you can see down here the truck full of clay. And the curious thing about this is this slab up here that it's built on is sitting on gray clay. There's gray clay, acres of it around, right? I talked to the guys in Grand Portage, and they say, no, you can't use gray clay. No, you need red clay, the same stuff that bricks are made out of, right? Makes sense. So I called up Bob Fox and Lori Brown over in, no, not Duluth, but the Terenshaw is a place where there was once a brick factory. So there's red clay. Well, they didn't have any on their property, but they knew somebody, and I could go dig up some clay, which I did. And I got over there, and I pulled this old pickup truck into the field, and it was immediately apparent that was not going to work, and I wasn't going to get a load of red clay out of that field, and I was stuck. So quick, I didn't go any farther. I got out. Curiously enough, I had at the time a AAA account through no fault of my own, and so I called them up, and I said, for example, hypothetically, if I was stuck in a field, would you come pull me out? Yeah, okay. So the next day I backed way down into that field. I filled that truck up. I called him up. The tow truck comes. The tow truck comes and he says, I can't get you out of there. But you'll notice right there is a pile of chains. His cable wasn't long enough was the problem. So I said, oh, no, I got chains. So I pulled out all the chains. He got the cable. He pulled me out. And off I was back to build a bread oven in Deer River, Minnesota. So, and this is a French-Canadian design. They started in Quebec. They built them all along the Great Lakes, and they built them at Fur Post. And this oven, I don't know if it still exists, but I have baked bread in here, and I've baked beans in here, and I've baked roast beef in here. Oh, it was great, yeah. Yeah, and so it works like, oh, another story. So it works similarly to ovens we have here. You heat up the mass, and clay is not as good a mass as what the bricks are, but anyway. And so then I'm sitting in the old yellow house, and Alan Scott was here teaching a class, and I don't know how many of you remember Alan Scott. He's from Australia or New Zealand? Australia, and he lived in California at the time, and he was internationally known for being a bread oven builder and a bread baker. And he's here, and we're sitting in the yellow house in the evening, and he's teaching a oven class, and I'm teaching something else. And he's traveling with this young man who's assisting him, and this young man is an expert at clay ovens. Oh, great. You know, and so I asked, and he's built them all over the country. And what kind of clay do you use? Gray clay. Yeah, it works fine. So now I got a call from a neighbor of mine who was interested in having some chairs built. I'd never built chairs before, and he wanted some. He had just built a house. This was Gene Shadley. He built a house in Beauvais, and he had two fireplaces of the Rumford design, which is an old 18th century design, and he wanted primitive chairs to go in front of these fireplaces. And having never done anything like that, I said, well, sure. And I started looking into old Welsh chairs, mostly the stick chair designs. And so I made these chairs, and they were okay. They were a little clunky. They were heavy. And they had no stretchers. They were all done with a draw knife. There was no turning, and he loved them. And then another friend saw those and said, "Well, geez, those are nice chairs, but they're kind of clunky, primitive. Could you do anything else?" And so this is when I started looking at early American chairs and British designs of chairs, and I started building. Oops, I got ahead of myself here. Oh yes, I did. Let's jump ahead here. Started building chairs, and these are some of the chairs I built. I brought two of them here tonight. This is a sack back chair, and this is a side chair, and it has back braces on it, which I feel are really essential to keeping your chair back from eventually wiggling, unless you have arms, because the arms are acting as braces on the so I built quite a number of chairs over the years, and then I started looking at the methods of work and how chairs were built and why they're, because I was intrigued by this, because this chair you can build in the woods. You can build with hand tools. You can split out wood, and you can use a hand drill, and you can use a foot-powered lathe, and you can put this chair together, and you can use green wood, and it doesn't take that long for turned parts to dry before you assemble it. So I was very intrigued with this, and so I entered into this project of building an 18th century chair shop, an itinerant shop. And let's see if I got my, oh, here we go. And so I want to say a few things about the concept of experiential archaeology. And this is well, first of all, I should say that Mike Magner once said, and Mike Magner was an archaeologist. He worked for the Historical Society. He worked for the DNR. Would it be accurate to say he was the state archaeologist? Contract. And he said that archaeology used to be about finding stuff. And it was, Indiana Jones would get the prize, and it would go behind glass. And now archaeology is about finding out stuff. It's about finding the stories behind the stuff. And experiential archaeology is less about actually digging things up, but takes that whole finding out stories to a whole nother level. And it's trying to put yourself in the place of people who came before us, and by using the tools and techniques and the methodologies to better understand the stories of those people that came before us. And this exercise can take many forms. The form that we most commonly associate it with is very finicky first-person historical reenactment. But that is only part of it. And the classic example is Thor Heyerdahl in 1947. People remember him, some of you do. And he set out to prove that people from Peru, from South America, could have sailed a balsa wood raft over to the South Pacific Islands, to the Polynesian Islands, and inhabited those islands. So to prove this, he went to Peru with a crew. He cut down balsa wood trees with an axe. He lashed together a raft. He sailed over there. Everybody survived, and he proved that it could have happened that way. So that's one of the more famous ones. John Turk, who's been to North House a number of times. He's an author and an adventurer. He's done a lot of trips. He did a book, and his premise was that people from Japan, prehistoric people from Japan, could have kayaked to Alaska, and that the ancestral roots of Alaskans are based in Asia. And he once again proved that it could happen that way. But simply put, this is an experiment where we try to put ourselves into the shoes of earlier people. And those may be literally the moccasins that earlier people wore, or the mucklucks, or the snowshoes, or the caulked boots, or the skis of earlier people. And it really adds a lot of depth to the experiment if you happen to have made those snowshoes or those moccasins. And even more so if you've made some of the tools to make the snowshoes or the skis or the moccasins. So by engaging with these methods, with these earlier people, the experimental archaeologist, the practitioner, can transform history from a static diorama to an engaging story and an understanding of earlier times. So I fell into this procedure really quite by accident. I didn't really set out to do this, but and I see it happening organically at North House all the time. The traditional craftspeople are always wanting to know the history and the roots and the way it was done and the tools it was done with. And so it doesn't have to look like that, but I think there's a lot of versions of this theory of experimental archaeology. So I'm going to go back to where I was because I missed a little part here. And we're going to, and at some point there, I bought a sawmill. So we make decisions about how we're going to approach traditional craft and the compromises we're going to make and the tools we need, and we're going to try to live in a simpler life. This sawmill for me has made a huge difference in sourcing wood for my work, and it also was a source of income because I did custom sawing for many years with this sawmill. And on the way home from buying this sawmill, pulled over for gas, and a guy pulls in behind me and says, are you doing custom sawing? Yeah. And when can you come over? And that was Robin Peck. And Robin Peck was from Deer River, and I ended up sawing wood for him for years. And I'd saw in the spring, saw up all his wood. He'd put me on the calendar for the fall. Well, there's no wood. There'll be wood by fall, and by golly, there was. Spring and fall every year. He was into ultralight aircraft. And he did a lot of things. He used most of this wood to finish his house and expand his house. And he was a dreamer and a sort of a big thinker, and he had a lot of projects going. And he was into these ultralight airplanes. And they're made out of spruce, and they're covered with fabric in the same kind of technique as the Wright brothers, but modern designs. And so he theorized that you could build these out of white pine, long, straight, clear white pine, and I was going to saw it, and I did saw a bunch of it. And I remember sitting at the kitchen table with Robin and his brother said, "You're going to kill yourself in that thing." And sure enough, he lost the engine. He crashed on the golf course in Grand Rapids, and that was the end of building airplanes with Robin, or sawing lumber for Robin. Another interesting guy I met was Ken Horn. Ken Horn had been a horse logger. He owned a stable with riding horses, with draft horses. He'd had a tree business. He was a really good tree climber, and he was a very hard worker. And so he was a guy that I learned a lot from, and I still do. And this is Ken Horn's place. And every day he would load up. So he had the tree business, right? Every day he's cutting down trees. So he drops a tree in your yard. You can have it. It's your tree. But if you want him to haul it off, he'd be happy to haul it off. Well, these are all the trees that he would haul off every day. And then I would make lumber out of it. And thousands and thousands and thousands of feet for Ken Horn. And he had plenty of machinery to stack those logs. He would stack them up just high. And there's one of the bigger ones. You can see I turned it with the come along, going over to whatever. And you can see the classic John's Root chainsaw, Mark. 621, yeah. And anybody that's been using it's still working. Anybody who's been using a chainsaw for very long had one of those at one time. They were the standard. Okay. See where we're at now. Okay, chairs. Archaeology. Oh, so then I endeavored to build a chair shop, an itinerant 18th century chair shop, and to build all the tools required to build chairs. And I did accomplish this, so I could build chairs under canvas with the spring pole lathe here. And I've brought a number of the tools that I've made to make chairs, and afterwards you can come up and look. And I built that toolbox also at that time to house all those tools. And I'm not sure I need to say anything more about those tools. And another shot of the chair camp with 18th century clothes, the shaving horse. And I presented this around the country, well, around the state, Wisconsin, at various events, presented it to schools. This was, it was really interesting to see the reaction of people, and this you get everything from, oh, they didn't have lathes back then. Well, we know that they've had lathes for 9,000 years or something, and we know that back then this was a common method, and that you would split wood out and you'd draw knife the wood, and so you get that reaction. But then you get various smart ass comments about, well, you could be using a belt sander for that, But the best comments was the best kind of eye-opening comments was the guy who never thought about how you do this, and he's got a plane that was his father's, and it's been in the basement, and it's caked with paint on the bottom, and it's never been adjusted right, and he associates hand tools with drudgery, and then all of a sudden, oh yeah, so maybe, just maybe back then, if you had well-maintained tools, that it wasn't hugely slow or awkward to do these things. We know Jared talked about the production back in earlier times of bowls and vessels, and how they were just really fast at it. And it's hard for us to kind of get behind that. But I find it's been useful to recreate some of the methods and the tools. I've also heard that the best way to train a draft horse is farm work. And the reason for this is it's hard work, it's repetitive. You hitch up that horse, you go in a straight line all day, you don't stop. And I would say that the same could apply to other tasks in life, and it definitely applies to turning wood. And I've learned to be a much better turner on it because of the spring pole lathe. Okay, now we'll get back to, let's see, chair. Oh, here's some more chairs. So these are all chairs that I've made. Stools, some similar to the ones we have here. I made some really tall shop stools at one time, and I decided they were too tall. And this height here is the height of that second one, and I think that's the right size. This is a continuous arm settee. It's got back braces for both seats. This is some of the detail that you get with the hand tools and the view of the back braces there. The leg that you see there, that was turned on the spring pole lathe with sharp hand tools. It's not been sanded. It's painted with milk paint, which accentuates that look there. And let's see what else here. Oh, so I was building these chairs with carved arms. They're nice. They're kind of hard. They take a long time. They're almost pushing the simplicity of the methods of Windsor to another artsier level. And I really wanted to promote the chairs with the plain arms, like you see here in this chair. And I was taking pictures and I was making brochures and I was trying to promote these things. But I didn't have a chair with plain arms, and I needed a picture of a chair with a plain arm. So I took some scraps from the shop, and I had some legs, that I stuck in there with no stretchers, and then so that one on the right is this one here. Whoops, is this one here. And since then, and I meant to bring it today, but since then I took the back off, and it's become the half-ass stool in my shop. I've also made tables. This is just one of many tables. They are flat and square, and there's those challenges. More difficult to make directly from the woods to the finished product, but if you have a sawmill, it's easily done. And it was about that time in this adventure, let's see, that I got a call from Mark Hansen. And he explained to me that they were building this folk school in Grand Marais. And this, that, and the other thing. I think most of you know the story. They wanted to promote classes, traditional craft, build community, and my name came up. And what did I want to teach? Well, boat building comes to mind. That's kind of what I've spent a lot of time learning. I'm pretty good at it. I've got these other things that I'm kind of starting to figure out. But they already had a bunch of boat builders. In the early days, they started out with a bunch of boat. Jeff Burke was here from the East Coast, and this guy named Bob Elliott from Maine was building dories, and Mark was building boats. And they're just a little school, and they're trying to create a diverse curriculum. And what else can you do? Well, I've been working on this chair thing, and building an 18th century camp, and I've built a spring. I'm working on a spring pole lathe, and I'm working on this. He says that's what we want to do. Lathes. And I said, I'm just getting this figured out, really. And I mentioned Roger Abrahamson. He's pretty good at this. Maybe you should get Roger to, do this. And Mark said, no, we want you to do it. Then, okay. Send me pictures. Okay. What I didn't really let on during that conversation is that the spring pole lathe hadn't been built yet. and so when he would call and say, "Geez, I didn't get those pictures yet." Well, back then you could say, "Well, the film's being developed. I'll get them in the mail." You didn't just click and send him the picture, right? So you could put it off for a while. So then I did build a lathe. These are the pictures I sent to Mark Hansen back in, whenever. And this is the lathe. You can see it's brand new lathe. Even the bolts are kind of shiny still here on the end. And I sent these pictures to Mark, and then off we were to the races, building spring pull lathes at North House. And we did a number of different classes, and we did a build your own spring pull lathe, and we built a lot of them. There's a lot of spring pull lathes went out the door. And then part of that was learning to turn on the lathe. And I ultimately did become pretty good at turning. And like I had said, that the spring pull lathe made me a better turner, because you can really see what you're doing. You can understand the cutting theory, and you can understand that you're carving wood. Never mind the wood's turning. You're carving wood, and you have to approach that in the same method as if the wood was standing still. The lathe is unique among woodworking machines, and it is a machine, even though it's foot powered, in that the wood's moving and the tool's not. I mean, the table saw, the tool's moving, the router, the tool's moving, the belt sander, the tool's moving, and the wood is clamped onto the table. This is completely different. And it's green wood, and it's at slow speed, and I still have slowed the speed. The first electric lathe I had was awful, and the first experiences were fairly awful. And I've kind of heard that repeated here this weekend, that, the first lathe was not. And so by slowing things down, I still turn pretty slowly, and I see fairly often, and it's not that high speed. I know some pretty good turners that do successfully use high speed, but I often see high speed substituted for proper turning technique, and ultimately that's really not a good idea. Anyway, so much to be learned from the process of recreating the tools, building the spring pull lathe, starting in at North House. Early on at North House, we built a Mackinac boat. And this boat's now up at Grand Portage. This is a typical boat from Lake Superior from the early part of the 20th century and before. And Tim Cochran was a mentor on that. He's written extensively about Great Lakes boats and made a study of them. And also Howard Severson, the painter, he grew up on Isle Royal, and he was fishing, and he remembers these boats, and he's painted pictures of it. So he was a help in designing it as well. It's a catch rig, meaning that the front mast is taller, unlike a schooner, the back mast is taller. It's got some kind of gaff sails on it, I don't even remember. It's got a center board, and it's lap strake, so it's a pretty big, heavy lap strake boat. And so the planks are lapped. And the beauty of that system is, if you put two pieces of wood together, it is possible to build watertight joinery, but they're going to shrink and swell, right? You lap them, and they shrink and swell like this, and they're clenched nailed together, so they stay tighter longer. They're more conducive to being pulled out of the water and put back in the water. So to me, it's a beautiful system. You can see it's clenched nailed all along. But it was a community project. Mark Hansen was heading out. Jeff Burke came in from the East Coast. Jeannie Berkwin worked on this boat. I worked on the boat. I don't even remember who all. And then in the finishing stages, there was a whole lot of people that worked on it. Alex from Latvia, you remember him? He worked on it a lot. And I don't even remember who else. Maybe Dennis Bradley worked on it. And so it was a pretty interesting project. These boats were used for fishing. They were used for hauling. They were used like pickup trucks going out to Isle Royal. You'd haul dirt. You'd haul firewood. You'd haul sheep. Whatever. And yeah. So I continued to teach at North House. We developed a snowshoe class, which I've done a lot now. And I should say a thank you to North House, because North House is a really good place to teach classes. It's an easy place to teach classes because they have good shops and good tools and good machinery. And I get a lot of calls. As I did more snowshoe classes, I got a lot of calls from people that, can you do this in the high school gymnasium? Well, do you have workbenches? No. Do you have bench vices? No. Do you have clamps? No. Do you have block planes? No. Well, now I come here and they have it all. So I have to credit and thank North House, and a big thank you to Jessa Frost, who's not here, because she has been my go-to contact at North House for many years in setting up and creating these classes. The snowshoe class is the one class that I developed that I could take on the road. And I had everything I needed. to do it. I had equipment for steaming. I had forms for it. I had, I didn't have workbenches, but I'd built some clamps that I could put on tables for lacing them. And so I did it at various different places. I did it at the Forest History Center. I did it for the employees of U.S. Steel. And those guys have a different outlook on life. They're machinists mostly. They work with metal. They were interesting. They were really interesting, and I had a good time. I did that a number of times for those guys, and then I was asked to develop a boat building class at the North House Folk School. There's a number of classes that we already had, but what would be basic boat building 101? And I right away said it'd be the Susan skiff. This was based on my experiences at the apprentice shop, how they taught beginning boat building. There's one right up on the ceiling right there. Pretty nice example of one. It's a flat bottom boat. And this is quite possibly the first one we ever built at North House. I'm not sure. And so it's a simple boat, but it's complicated in that you get to learn a lot of stuff. There's lapstrake planking on the side. There's carvel planking, which is caulked with cotton on the bottom. There's a stem rabbet in the stem. And trust me, you don't have to know how to make a stem rabbet to build a boat. There's easier ways, but in this class, you get to learn the stem rabbet. And there's a transom on the back, and there's these lovely little breast hook and quarter knees in it. And so there's a lot going on here. And we did it as a build your own. We built a bunch of these, and we did a bunch of versions of the class. And one was a whole group would get together and work on a boat, which produced a bunch of unfinished Susan skiffs. And if anybody has any interest or bright ideas about unfinished Susan skiffs, we'll talk later. Let's see. Built workbenches at North House. You've seen a lot of these around. I built a workbench that looked like this about 30 years ago, and I used to bring it to North House, and people said, geez, we ought to build some of those. So we've built a lot of them, and they've changed design a little bit. I look at them as timber framing in miniature. I did this class for a long time. It's a lot of setup. I had the pleasure of working with Lauren a couple of times on this, and now Lauren is building workbenches, and they're packing them, the students in, as I understand. Yeah. So Lauren was another person who I really enjoyed working with, and I learned a lot, and she's a very skilled woodworker, and I appreciate her. We built a pram. Mark Hansen started out building prams at North House, and then when he retired out of that, I took over building prams. Prams are different than skiffs. I like to build them better, and they're easier for students. You don't learn all the same stuff. They're not built with molds. They're not built with lofting. They're not built with a great deal of math. They're built by eye, and so it's taking that building three-dimensional things that are not flat and square to a whole nother length. And but students get it, and we've successfully done it. Haven't done it in a while, but I understand somebody else has picked this up. Anyway.
Yeah, there's two guys teaching it together.
Good.
They're great.
All right. Glad to hear it. Here's a project I did, was recreating a raised panel using period tools. And I did this because somebody asked me to build a door for them. And so I built a door. This particular raised panel goes above a fireplace. And these are the three of the planes that I used for the process. And so this was interesting to me just because I was recreating the original tools and using the original tools. It is flat and square. So here you see the panel raising plane. This was made by Leon Robbins out in Maine. I'd always wanted one of these, and when I got the opportunity to build some of these raised panels, that gave me the excuse to buy one. This is a British plow plane, the forerunner to the Stanley 45. If you don't know what a Stanley 45 is, you should take Lauren's class. And then a beating plane that was used right here on this edge right here. So there's a groove, the feather edge of the panel goes into that, and so a raised panel. We also did at North House, another project at North House, all from one tree. And so we brought in a birch tree. And Fred was here, and Marco was here, and I think Roger Abrahamson was here. So how many things can you build from one tree? Starting with making things from the bark, making dye from the bark or the leaves, do we remember? Making beer from either the bark or the leaves, I don't remember. And that's just the start. And then carving spoons out of the twigs, splitting up, Roger was here turning bowls, toboggan was made, snowshoes were made, canoe paddles were made. And then I thought, well, you know, I talk about these old Welsh bodgers. And we talk about that they would go into the woods. And bodgers were wood turners, but they were not chair builders. They would supply turned parts to chair builders. And they would go into the woods, and they'd cut down trees, and they'd split them up. They'd set up a camp. They would build a lathe on the spot. They'd turn legs. They would haul legs back to town. They didn't ever haul logs out of the woods. And I talk about, but I've never done it. I've never tried. So here I decided to try it. So out of this one tree, I built this lathe, which is 2 stakes in the ground. What I brought with me into the woods that day was two wooden clamps and the 2 steel ends here. There's a screw and there's another piece there. So you got these 2 in the ground, braced as good as you can. The thing about this lathe is it was not adjustable for length. You could only turn one thing. And I made a cricket, a small oval stool with short legs, and part of the reason for that was that the legs are about the same length as the stretchers, so I didn't have to adjust length. And then this is another picture of it over here, of that primitive lathe with a birch spring pole and a treadle. And so I seem to recall about 8 hours starting from the log, built the lathe, turned one leg, 8 hours. And then, of course, I turned the rest of the parts. And the top came from another piece of birch. And it was all from one tree. Yeah. And then I was approached by a student who had built a number of boats here, a guy by the name of Gary Holkirk. And he was a real character. I don't know if any of you remember him, but I found him really enjoyable. He was kind of loudmouth and crass, and not everybody enjoyed him. He did a lot of classes here. He built a number of boats here. I first met him, he built snowshoes in my class. And then he built, with Mark, he built a kayak, and he built a pram, and then he built a Susan skiff. And then he says to me, well, what's the next step? What's the advanced class? And I said, well, a round bottom lap straight boat. And when I say round bottom, what I mean is that there's a structural keel. So different than a skiff, different than a wood canvas canoe, different than a pram even. It's a structural keel, it has a rabbet going all the way down, and then it's round, and there's 9 planks on the side, which is way more than a skiff. And we started out, this is another thing I always wanted to do, with a half model. I think the half model is still around here somewhere. I carved the half model, then we took a saw and sawed cuts in it where the stations were going to be. We slid a piece of paper in, traced out the section, did the lofting full size, and built the molds, and then built the peapod. So it was quite a process. And yeah, done it once. We could do it again. Now, I want to say that traditional work, a life of traditional work, extends beyond just woodworking. Oh, I missed one. Dang. This is another tool that I made relevant to the peapod, relevant to lap straight boat building. The complication of the gain. As the planks enter the stem rabbet, they go from being lapped to being flush, to being one. Can you see that on there? And to do that, you do this tricky bevel on 2 sides. And if you plane 2 sides that are completely flat, they'll come together, they'll be watertight. If you plane them so they're the least bit round, then they don't fit. And they tend to crack. And so you got to sometimes even take just a little smidgen of a hollow out of there to get them to come together. Well, I couldn't find the right tool for it. So I built these spoke shaves. And it's not that there isn't any spoke shaves in the world that look like this, but I couldn't find one that really worked well. And the problem is that the castings are sloppy, the mouth is too big. This one, the mouth is really tight and consistent. The blades on these are nothing special, but it's the fact that the tolerances are really accurate that makes them work well. And so I made them for, I thought I brought some of those in. I must not have brought them in. For bolt building, but they're useful for all kinds of things. I sold a bunch of them to students in the store. And the way that I made these was I carved one out of birch. And then a friend of mine, Mike McCarroll, I was going to bring the mold for this too, which is kind of interesting. Mike McCarroll is a machinist and a millwright, and he does all kinds of castings. He's done, I guess he doesn't do any ferrous casting, but he at one time was the only guy in the country you could buy replacement parts for Indian motorcycles, because he would take the originals and cast them. And he's nearly 90 years old now, I think. He called me out the other day. He's asking about lefts or sauerkraut tampers. And he's a guy that not everybody gets along with. He's pretty bold. He's pretty outspoken, and he used to be outspoken and drunk. He's not anymore, fortunately. Anyway, he's a mechanical genius, and I took this mold to this birch spoke shave to him that I'd carved out of wood, and right away I didn't even have to ask him, could I get you to cast me one of these? He's on top of the project. He wants to do it. So he took the birch, the positive image. And then it goes into sand, and then it comes out of the sand, and then you pour bronze into the sand, and then you pop out this, and then there's quite a bit of finish work on it, and polishing it up and tuning up the mouth and fitting the blade in there. So I cooperated with him on that one, and I even got to see the pour 3,000 degree bronze going into the sand. And that's when Mike gets really kind of stern, because you don't want to mess up. There's no being polite about 3,000 degree bronze. So another tool. Now, traditional work, I would suggest, extends far beyond woodworking. One's life choices, the way you decide to live, it has to include food and food production. And so this is some of the food that Terry and I have grown. And sweet potatoes at the top, which is hard to grow north of the Laurentian Divide, but we have successfully done so. And this is my partner, Terry, and I have to recognize and thank her for her contributions to gardening and to influencing me, because I wouldn't be doing the gardening to the extent without her. So thank you, Terry. And this is kind of everyday meal, weeknight meal at our plate. No, it's not. No, this was a smorgasbord that we hosted, and this is our kitchen over here, our overcrowded kitchen. And pie. Traditional food wouldn't be complete without mentioning pies. Yeah. Let's see here. Now, okay. Robin Wood. Some of you remember Robin Wood being here. He's a traditional British bowl turner. He's a production turner. He's really good at it. He's fast. He's recreated a lot of original tools. And he's coined the phrase, right? I've heard him quote that he believes that modern people, maybe we're on to the next slide here. Oh, I forgot to mention rice. As far as traditional food goes, rice. And I've been doing this for about 30 years. This guy over here, John Hayes, and I have been doing rice together for about 30 years. This obviously is earlier times in the Saliga canoe on the Mississippi River, and this was just a couple of years ago. We've taken to processing our own rice just because there's less options for other people doing it. And Frank Bebo, who lives up in Ball Club, he's a native guy. He's inherited this operation. And he believes in carrying on the tradition of rice, but he doesn't really want to work that hard. So we go over there and do our rice, and he's our mentor. And he says things like, he'll take a handful of rice and another minute, he'll say. Yeah, so. Here's the quote I'm looking for from Robin Wood. He coined the phrase craving the analog. He believes that modern people are craving the analog. In a world of chaos and digital content, people are craving tactile experiences. But I suggest that then maybe it's not about the item, the spoon. It's not about the Windsor chair. It's not about somebody ordering a Windsor chair and I produce the chair and I deliver the chair, which I've done a lot of. But maybe it's more about the process. And this is why I have segued my work in the past 20 years to not making and selling as many things, but teaching people to make things and talking about traditional woodworking and history. And there's certainly value in the teaching of the skill, in the person passing on the skill, but there's also value in the community aspect of it. And it changes by making a product, by teaching someone to make the product, it changes them from simply a consumer to a participant in the activity. And also, as North House has proven, if this is carried on successfully, it can actually be a profitable endeavor too. So perhaps you remember in 2008, I think I got my slides right now, 2008, the Great Recession of 2008. And you know, stock markets changed and people were in panic about their retirement. And anyway, for me, people quit buying stuff and classes at North House were being canceled. And it had an effect. At first I didn't believe it because people were saying, oh no, we're living from hand to mouth, we're living paycheck to paycheck, oh we don't have enough money to pay the bills. And I thought, yeah, how's that so different, you know? But then I became convinced that this was a real thing. And by 2011, it became apparent that I needed a job other than what I was doing. And it quite possibly was Terry that pointed out to me that I needed a job. And so this is when I started working for the Minnesota Historical Society at a place called the Forest History Center. And it's important to note that the Minnesota Historical Society, well, first of all, a couple of quiz questions. Who knows, I'm sure many of you know, when Minnesota became a state? 1858, very good. The bonus question, though, is when was the Minnesota Historical Society created? Before that, you're right. 1849, the territorial government saw the need to create a historical society. And Alexander Ramsey was the territorial governor, and he and some other far-sighted people saw the need to save history. And in the early days, it was largely records and archives that they saved. And now it's much more than that. And so the Minnesota Historical Society is not a state agency, but rather a nonprofit educational organization, much like North House. It's statewide. There's 26 sites around the state, including the Forest History Center, and it is largely funded by the state, but is not a state organization. So I started out there in 2011, and I started out doing a first-person interpretation of logging history, which entailed primarily blacksmithing and woodworking, period woodworking, and doing repairs in the camp, and working with horses. And these are just a few shots from over the years there. And so I saw that poster on the high school wall, and finally I got back to working with horses, but this time with regular pay. And I met a lot of really good people when I started at the Forest History Center. Bill Carpenter was a mentor to me, and he's an excellent blacksmith and an excellent interpreter of history. Joan Solberg, who's an excellent baker and a good interpreter, good storyteller. Brad Nett, Will Holnagel, whose accordion I now have. He's no longer living, but he was an excellent musician, and Becky McCauley. All were people that I learned from, who I felt very fortunate to work with. None of them work there anymore. And I met this guy here, Dwayne Barrows. And Dwayne, at the time that I met him, had probably been driving horses for 60 years. And so most of what I know about horses I learned from Dwayne, even though years ago I'd had, learned how to drive horses, but that was years ago. So at first this was very seasonal work. And so I worked at North House in the winter, which is really the best time of year to find a parking spot in Grand Marais. And then I would do most of my work in the summer at the Forest History Center. Things have changed there. My job has changed there. And so I'm now working there full-time. In fact, I first got a full-time job during the pandemic, which not many people can say that. And eventually, due to staffing changes and various other coincidences, I became a supervisor. So, you know, my greatest fear back in 1980 as I observed my coworkers at the Forest Service, I had now been promoted to a desk job. And it paid really well. I mean, it was more money than I'd ever made in my life. And I learned a lot from it. And I tell students that, you know, you should work on the thing that's hard for you. I know the draw knife is hard, but don't just go over here and you know, cop out, because the thing that's hard, well, I realized that I was not practicing that in my life at all. Well, by becoming a supervisor, I was, and it was pretty challenging, and I did learn a great, I couldn't have made this slideshow before that job. I wouldn't have had the foggiest idea how to operate this thing here. But there I was at a desk job. Well then, the paradigms changed at the Forest History Center. We became more of a year-round site, and in 2022, there was a major paradigm shift and some money available to buy horses. And we were cleared, we were approved to buy newer, younger, well-trained horses. And we'd had horses for 40 years, and we'd had all different horses, and we'd had rented horses, and the rented horses mostly went away in the winter time, and we'd had some horses with issues, and we didn't mostly have horses that we could really trust to do a lot of programming. We bought a team of horses from Marco. They did pull the slave successfully. Jack and Julie. Julie died of cancer in 2020. Jack is still around. He's 27 years old now, I believe. Yep. And so we had one 27-year-old horse, or at the time 23 years old or whatever that was. And so we want horses that we can work with, that we can do demonstrations, that we can do logging, we can do field work, we can give rides. And at the time, there was money available for that. So I was told, you know, here I'm working there, and I'm got a desk job, and the announcement comes that we've been approved. We've got this money. It can only be spent on horses. It must be spent before the end of the fiscal year. Here you go. Oh, and furthermore, this isn't going to happen again. So I'm kind of looking around the room, and so who's going to buy horses here, you know? So I started shopping for horses, and it was a really interesting procedure. And I identified, I think 12 teams of potential horses around Minnesota, Iowa, and Wisconsin. And we went and visited and drove 7 teams of those horses. And then we bought, at that time, 2 teams of horses. I was then able to hire a draft horse handler. That was part of the deal. This is Michael Wilbur, and he's been full-time for 2 years now, I believe, driving horses. And then things changed again. Horses moved around. The Oliver Kelly Farm, another historical society site, had horses, but they didn't have anybody to drive them. And they had these young horses with a lot of potential. So we did a trade. Jack, our horse, Marco's horse, went down to the Kelly Farm, and then this new young team came up to the Forest History Center. It's now at 6 horses. And curiously enough, at the Kelly Farm, their old horse, also 27 years old, also named Jack, and now the 2 of them live together down there at the Kelly Farm. And one of the horses is the Percheron, I think from the Kelly Farm, is blind in one eye, so they have a one-eyed Jack and a two-eyed Jack. So now we have more horses, and a new position is created to hire a second draft horse handler, and I'm the supervisor, and I wrote the position description, and I'm the hiring manager, and I'm posting this job. And then I thought, maybe I want that job. So first I got some kind of blank stares, you know, because I'm the guy hiring. So things had to be kind of rearranged, and ultimately the rest of the story is I did take the job I'm no longer supervising. I'm now spending less time at a desk. I'm driving horses at the Forest History Center. And my new job entails, that up there, just by the way, is Marco's horses, Jack and Julie. So my new job entails making sure the horses get driven on a regular basis, making sure that they're part of everyday presentations of history, building and restoring horse-drawn equipment, such as that sleigh there is one that I rebuilt. It's probably from the 50s. Whoops. And making sure that we as a group can provide opportunities to the general public to connect them with horses and teach Minnesota history by doing this. We load logs, we skid logs, we have where'd that go? A trolley with wheels on it for the summer, the sleigh for the winter. Here's loading logs onto a sleigh. So this is two shots of the same thing. So this guy's on the horses. The cable goes up over the load, around the log. You can see the log coming up the ramps. The horses step forward. The log comes up onto the sleigh. All of those logs are loaded on there with horses.
They can carry that?
No. There's more to the story. In 1900, big industrial logging was done on ice roads, and these ice roads were contrived and built. They were no small chore to build, and 2 horses could pull that load on an ice road. In that picture there, 2 horses would not be pulling that load. So it's suspension of disbelief, perhaps. Yeah. So the job has provided me with an opportunity to present traditional craft and historic interpretation, and I feel very fortunate to have now a full-time job in which I'm once again driving horses, and 6 big horses that I get to work with every day.
That's so great.
Oh, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention ski juring with horses, which is something I've just learned to do. Fortunately, I've met someone who makes these harnesses for horse ski juring, and this is draft horse ski juring. You've probably seen the Wild West cowboys out there ride with the rider and the skier, and they're going 40 miles an hour over jumps. And we don't do that. So in this case, the driver is being pulled by the horse and driving the horse at the same time. And so the horse is going no faster than what in any situation, you're telling the horse what to do. And in fact, with these draft horses, it was kind of hard to convince them to trot. We were kind of like, come on, guys, step it up, So here I'm finally getting going in this picture here, Yeah. And so I don't know if anybody has anything else they want to know, any questions you want? I have some tools up here that'd be
Who's that guy in the picture?
Who's the guy in the picture? Yeah.
15 years ago.
Oh, this is a good story.
I didn't know anything about wood. I didn't know anything about anything. And Scott, can you use the mic?
Oh yeah, here.
I'll just walk. So maybe 13, 14, 15 years ago, I came to North House. I don't know how I found it. I don't know why or how. I had a skew tool, and I met John.
That was
And
the only tool you own.
the only tool I own. And I came home with a workbench, the old 1800 workbench. And I figured out that the next year I needed a stool to sit on, so I made that. And every day, I use my table and sit on my stool. And now I know that a skew can be used also.
And furthermore, and I've seen it, he's built a shop around the workbench, and is quite an accomplished wood turner.
I do all right. And so John led me on that journey, which led me to Fred and to this place, and I'm forever grateful. So thank you.
Raise your hand if